Gods of Gotham starts out by introducing us to the main character, Timothy Wilde, a bartender at an oyster bar turned copper star for the New York Police Department. The story takes place in New York after the Great New York Fire at the end of 1835. Tim loses his money and half of his face when the fire struck Manhattan. He lost his job as a bartender and was forced to become a copper star. His brother, Valentine Wilde, saved him from the fire and also saved him by getting him a job as a copper star. Val is an arrogant, morphine, laudanum, and alcohol addict who plays a big role in the community, being part of politics, a fireman, and now a police captain. Forced to find a new home after the fire, Tim ends up living with a widowed baker, Mrs. Bohm, after one of his shifts as a roundsman in the 6th Ward, in which he was appointed to because of his ability to speak Flash. He was met with a terrified little girl covered in blood in the night. We find out that the little girl goes by the name Bird Daly, and she was running from her previous place of living and employment. She was what was known as a Kinchin mob, which Tim gathered by the nightgown she was wearing and the way that her hair was neatly pulled back into a bun. This particular Kinchin mob belonged to Silky Marsh's brothel. However, Tim takes her to live in with him. Bird reveals to Tim that the man in a black hood had killed another Kinchin, of which the corpse is found the next day. She eventually confesses the whole truth, as she has a tendency to lie, and lies very well. The Kinchin was identified through Mercy Underhill, a charity worker of all sorts, the daughter of the Reverend, and Timothy Wilde's love interest. After knowing of the slain Kinchin, Bird said she knew of more than a dozen more, and takes Tim, Chief George Washington Matzel, and a couple other copper stars and a doctor to the place where 19 bodies of children were discovered, with crosses carved into them and some missing organs. All of the dead children were presumed to be Irish immigrants. This starts an investigation into Silky Marsh and about exploiting underage children for sex. The legal age is 16, and the majority of the Kinchin were no more than 12. As the dead children and the man in the black hood that appears in a black carriage were found and seen on her property. The Herald gets a hold of the story, as a lot of copper stars know about the dead Irish children. After the story is out, since everyone reads the newspaper, Timothy and Val start getting letters addressed to them inside the hand of the god of Gotham. As not to stir the political pot and risk losing the newly started police force, Tim is told he is not working on the investigation and there are no dead Irish children. He is to keep the investigation a secret and involve Peast, Dr. Palgraves, Chief Matzel, and his brother. Since Silky is a big beneficiary, Val wants nothing to do with the investigation and tries numerous things to get Tim to stop investigating as well. He abducts Bird, has his henchmen almost beat Tim to death, and just anything to silence him and convince him to stop. As the investigation is supposed to be a secret, a very public death was on display just in the entrance of the church, so there's no more hiding the investigation. Tim is dead set on solving who is behind the slayings and assumes it might be his brother after finding information out via Mercy when he followed her into Silky's, discovering she has been selling herself as to get money to leave for London, since her father won't let her write her book, help save children that aren't worth saving, and overall won't let her do things she loves because of the death of her mother, because of cholera, because she was helping sick Irish. Mercy reveals all of this to Tim while in the brothel, since he is mad that Mercy would even step foot in there, knowing that the children who she tried so hard to help when they were sickly were being taken and killed from that brothel. The tension between brothers, a serial killer butchering and carving child prostitutes, a potential religious war, Irish emigration, and the crime-ridden New York slums where everyone is trying to find work in any way possible, makes for a good crime story that has the right combination of real and fiction regarding policing in early America. This novel gives a look into how early policing was formed and how they acted and were treated, albeit a fictional novel. It also gives insight to how hard it was to prosecute anyone for crimes, as the Copper Stars had to see someone committing the crime, since DNA and fingerprint technology had not been invented yet. It shows how far policing has come and how it has evolved through the years, how politically intertwined it was, since they were scared that a serial murder investigation would be the end for the NYPD due to beneficiaries and voters being investigated and the scare in general. Starting off from the opinion that is included on the book cover by Maureen Corrigan, author, scholar, and literary critic, NPR's Fresh Air states, "It's been almost 20 years since Caleb Carr's best-selling old New York crime novel, The Alienist. New York has inspired lots of terrific thrillers, but I've just stumbled on one of the worthiest successors yet, The Gods of Gotham." Another review of this novel from the New York Times remarked, There's nothing about Poe or the Knicks in Lindsay Fay's rollicking historical novel, but she does offer a sensational account of what early police work was like for those untested and ill-trained copper stars who patrol the city in 16-hour shifts, trying to keep members of the populace from robbing, swindling, thrashing, raping, and murdering one another. Adding to the point I previously made regarding how this novel furthers our understanding of American history and people's perception, the Washington Post's review of Lindsay Fay's novel is just in awe at how she fictionally but truthfully writes about the policing system. She artfully weaves history and politics, particularly the age's ugly sectarianism, adding literary heft without weighing the novel down, and ends the review by mentioning readers of historical thrillers will be, as one of Fay's characters might put it, kettled pink. Along with all of the reviews found online, there are many within the book as well, just inside the front cover, from news sites and award-winning authors to history professors. These all are reasonable reviews in which I couldn't find any obviously negative reviews about. It shows how historically accurate Fay was while writing this novel, but also her ability to balance a historical accuracy with fiction and keep the reader interested. I personally enjoyed this novel. As previously mentioned, the historical accuracy of the novel balanced with the fictional aspect quite well. The characters in this novel were also well thought out, and some where you hate to love them, particularly the main character since he lost everything, but in his fight with Mercy, you see just how selfish he is. However, he is all that he has, as he is justified in not trusting his brother, since his brother is also selfish and helps people just to fit a political agenda. Tim is humble but arrogant enough to be allowed to toot his own horn sometimes. Bird is another character that is that way as well. She's constantly lying through her teeth, and you're yelling, "Why don't you just tell the truth?" But you have to remember the things she was exposed to at a very young age and learn that lying is what makes the difference between life and death for her. I really have no complaints about the book. There weren't plot holes, the story flowed smoothly, and there were just enough twists and cliffhangers to keep me reading.
Everybody gets.
Okay. So these aren't in any like particular order. They just they kind of came out. Like I wrote them down when I was thinking of them. So I guess my first question, and this is for Gods of Gotham, is what research did you do for this book?
Okay, so my normal process for historical fiction, it started with my first novel, Dust and Shadow, which is about the Jack the Ripper murders in 1888 in London. I followed the same process with Gods of Gotham, which was my second novel. And then that's the first in a trilogy with The Fatal Flame and Seven for a Secret. I do about 6 months worth of research before I embark on writing anything at all. I look at my research process as involving a couple different levels of research. One is sort of the macroscopic research, and the other is more of what I consider, I call it more of a microscopic research, right? I've got different zoom settings, like of focus on the research that I do. So I'll often start with the macroscopic, like history books regarding the NYPD and how it was founded. But I almost never find out exactly the level of detail that I want in books that other people have written about history, because of the fact that they have to be efficient as storytellers. And if you're writing a book on NYPD history, or on the Irish, the Great Famine, the Potato Famine, the huge influx of Irish immigrants, if you're writing something about the massive fire downtown that happened in 1845, you need to be efficient about your own storytelling. You know, if you're writing about tenements, if you're writing about ghettos and slums, if you're writing about particularly in this case, the NYPD was extremely important, but also race relations. And, you know, like the topic is just too big for any one historian to efficiently talk about it in enough detail for me. So I do a couple things in addition to that. One of them is that I poach their sources. So I take the history book and then I read it and I get the macroscopic view, the zoomed out view, and then I sort of understand what's going on. And then I go to their index and I mark which things I think I would like to steal. And after I've marked all of those things down, I really go to original sources. My favorite types of original sources are personal correspondence, because that contains all kinds of slang and vernacular that you wouldn't find in a history book unless it's directly quoting something. But my favorite for Gods of Gotham specifically was newspapers. And I read the Herald newspaper was in publication at the time. And I nursed my vitamin D deficiency during that process, buried in the bowels of the Bryant Park main branch, with the library lions and everything, of the Bryant Park Research Library of the NYPL, because they have all of it on microfilm. So I was reading the Herald newspaper from the entire year 1845 off of microfilm for Gods of Gotham. If Timothy Wilde is walking down the street and he glances, to the left, and he sees a huge sign in an apothecary window for half price Turkish leeches, like only the best leeches, guys. We got the best Turkish leeches. That was from a real advertisement in the newspaper. So I go through the newspapers and I write down all kinds of details, and the more details I can garner from original sources, the more effective my storytelling is. Like the quotations at the very beginning of all chapters of Gods of Gotham, those are all from original sources. So I'm very careful about that stuff.
All right. I did notice those. I read all those excerpts and was like, wow, like this must be like there must be like some type of library that has like the Herald, like actual like the huge things that like have the newspapers and you like scroll through it. I know that's like old.
Yeah, no, that's what I just said. Like yeah, I was in the bottom of the library on a microfilm. They're all on microfilm. So
Oh,
yeah, so I was scrolling through microfilm, and it's not searchable. Obviously, some microfilm departments actually are. When I wrote the Paragon Hotel, which is set in Portland, Oregon in the 20s, their microfilm is searchable, not unlike the way Google Books is searchable, right? But anything on most microfilm is not searchable. So I just read the entire year and I was like, oh, Turkish leeches. Well, that's a good detail. Let's have him walk past that. It's fun. Engaging.
all right. So the next question is the about the time period. Why did you choose this time period in particular?
It chose me, actually. I wanted to tell the story of day one, cop one of the NYPD. That was the story that I wanted to tell. You see a lot of historical fiction along the lines of Caleb Carr, the Alienist, right? Which is obviously extremely famous, but it's almost all 1880s, 1890s. It's later. It's what would have been the Victorian period in England, but in the United States, it turn of the century, right? Stuff. And that's most of what you find. What I wanted was the very first police officer out the door of the Tombs police station when they first got hired. Like, as I said, day one, cop one. And Timothy actually, when he signs up for the police force, or Valentine makes him sign up for the police force, when he goes to register and everything and he gets his copper star badge, he actually is the first person to walk back out the door, like as a cop, right? I wanted an origin story. I wanted to know how Batman's parents were killed in the alleyway, like I wanted the beginning, right? Because that wasn't a book that I had read before, and every book that I've ever written, I wrote because it didn't exist yet and I wanted to read it. So I guess it was my job. So I picked 1845 because, quite frankly, that was the year that the NYPD was founded, and that was the very first, police force. Everything else was completely coincidental, and was a giant boon to storytelling, obviously, but it wasn't like somehow orchestrated the fact that the same year there was a huge explosion, a massive fire downtown that people could hear and see as far off as New Jersey. It was a complete coincidence that the Irish were suddenly flooding into the city, right? And the racial tensions were massive, and the Whigs and the Democrats were at complete loggerheads and fisticuffs as well. So all of that happened because I wanted to write about the first cop.
All right. So what difficulties did you face while writing this book besides maybe like the extensive research? Because I feel like that's very extensive for any book if you want some accuracy.
I find that with historical fiction specifically, you need to take one of two routes. You either need to be extraordinarily specific, or you need to throw it out the window and have talking animals like all you want, right? And I like both. The same goes for language. So either get it right in terms of the vernacular and the way people would speak to each other during that time period, or go Hilary Mantel, Wolf Hall, and forget about it, and just say, I'm going to be historically accurate, but I don't care what they actually sounded like, right? So both are also, I like both again. But what I do is to try to be as accurate as I possibly can. So probably one of the most difficult things that I did writing Gods of Gotham and its two sequels was the fact that a big part of the story is the slang dialect that they're using to try to avoid detection and avoid they need to be able to speak to the criminal classes who are using a very, very convoluted slang dialect that's sort of based on Cockney thieves' cant, but a lot of cultures have developed, street slang as a way of communicating within a subculture, right? Particularly a marginalized subculture. So I found that the George Washington Matzel, the chief of police in the Gods of Gotham and subsequent Tim Wilde books, he was a real person. That police chief was a total eccentric and a fascinating individual, but he wrote a book that I discovered called Vocabulum, or the Rogue's Lexicon. And it was a dictionary because his Copper Star police had no idea what the people they were interrogating were saying. Half of them. Some of them were, pretty badass themselves. I mean, Valentine speaks Flash from the get-go. So does Timothy, because Timothy grew up with his older brother Valentine. But the very specific nature of this dictionary that I found was remarkable, and it was wonderful. So George Washington Matzel, he writes this dictionary, right? Vocabulum, the Rogue's Lexicon. Marvelous. And I get my hands on it because you can get it in reprint, right? And you can also find it online. But that was a dictionary, that wasn't a syntax. So flash patter, flash dialogue, all of the dialect that the brothers use and that anyone else who speaks Flash uses in those books, I had to invent the syntax. And I am something of a linguist personally. So that was fun. It was challenging, so that'll be my answer to your question. That was challenging, but it was also very fun because I had a dictionary. I didn't have can you use it in a sentence. So the way I use many of the vocabulary words in actual sentences is my own invented syntax for flash patter. But yeah, it was great. It was hard.
I just even the now English language is very very hard and very impressive in general. So like even like reading historical books like that, like even okay, so like this book and like maybe like Shakespeare, like
Sure.
it's so hard to like this is what this actually means. And like there's context clues, but they
Yeah.
sometimes use words that mean something totally different now. So,
Sure, language is organic, and I tried to make the context clues as obvious as possible when I could, but then it had to have a dictionary at the beginning. It had to. And
mhm.
so do the sequels. They all have dictionaries at the beginning, because as much as I tried to provide context clues, Sometimes you just couldn't. And it becomes sort of like when you're trying to read Clockwork Orange. Like if you're trying to read Clockwork Orange, and at first it makes no sense whatsoever, and then you sort of like get the hang of it because
Mm.
you've read enough of it that you're like, oh, that word happened before and I know now what that means. So there's that aspect of it as well. You sort of learn the language as you're reading it, but then it's learning it as you read it, it's context, and then I just the dictionary, there was no way around it. Like it had to be there.
I really enjoy when there's like dictionaries put in like books. It makes it so much easier. So um
Well, and I was basing my flash patter syntax off of a dictionary. So like I had the definitions right there. I mean, it's not like they're copyrighted, it's a dictionary, but even if it had been copyrighted, it would be way out of copyright, but it wasn't copyrighted. I mean, like I had free use of all of those definitions from Matzel. And so it was a joy for me to like pick which words. I was like, oh, okay, that needs to be in the dictionary because it needs to be quite clear.
all right. So what's your favorite thing about the genre that you write?
My favorite thing about writing historical fiction is that I get to talk about things that piss me off now, and I get to do. It's funny you bring up that you bring up Shakespeare, because Shakespeare did a lot of the same thing. Shakespeare liked to set things out of town, you know, and he's just like, no, there's no political infighting here. I need to talk to you about Verona. So these guys in Verona, like, or Scotland. Let me tell you about the Scottish, and so he was just like, Scotland, over there. So there was a lot of stuff that was happening during Shakespeare's time that he wanted to, lampoon or outright mock or decry or be pissed off about, that he was just like, well, it is Verona. Don't worry about it. But I get to do that too. When I was writing Gods of Gotham, I remember very specifically it was during a time period where people were trying to construct a very peaceful, like a specifically pacifist, but Muslim faith backed community center way downtown by what was then a giant sad hole in the ground, which now of course is a beautiful skyscraper again. But there was a huge outcry about building this Muslim community center right at ground zero. And some of the rhetoric was it was awful. It was loathsome and hateful and terrible, and it pissed me off because I have Muslim friends. So I was mad about it, but I got to set it out of town and do it with the Irish instead, because it really was thought at the time that Catholicism was the devil's, like you were a Satanist if you were Catholic, right? And the Irish integrated very, very quickly because the Irish spoke English. They had to. Their land in Ireland was owned by British overlords. So, even if these are people who speak Gaelic, most of them speak English as well. So they assimilated very, very quickly, as opposed to cultures like the Chinese, where you still have Chinatowns, right? Where everything's written in Chinese, and Chinese congregate still. Same with say Brighton Beach in New York City. The street signs are in Cyrillic because everyone in Brighton Beach is Russian. So when I go to Brighton Beach, I have no idea where the hell I am. But I know I can get some really good smoked fish and chilled vodka, but I can't read a thing. So with the Irish, it happened quite quickly. Now we think of Irish as Americans, I mean, they're Irish. St. Patrick's Day is the thing, it's nonsense. But I can still, unfortunately, all of these political principles that were going on historically, sadly, they still apply today. And now people are screaming about Mexicans. So, I mean, it's always somebody, right? And the best thing about my genre is that I can get up on a little box of soap, but nobody's really thinking that I'm that I'm doing that per se, because they're reading a story about other people. The other thing that I like best about it is that I'm pansexual, and there are queer characters in pretty much all of my fiction. The Sherlock Holmes pastiches, a lot of people think Sherlock Holmes was probably asexual, or homosexual or heterosexual. I don't care. No one knows. Like, no one knows. That's an iconic character. Whatever you think of Sherlock Holmes, you're right. Like, your headcanon is your headcanon, right? You're correct. With all my other books, with my original characters, somebody is on a queer spectrum, right? In all of my other books. And I do that because queers always existed. I mean, they were spinsters, and they were spinsters their whole lives, and they lived together, and they crocheted really pretty flowers next to the fireplace together, and they were like sisters. They were companions till they died and were buried together. Like, it's sort of like, okay, yeah. So I can take those cultures that are very obviously queer, like Oscar Wilde really famously said that he loved sucking cock and it was inspiring to him. Go.
Really?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. He said that inspiration is best found on your knees. So Oscar, Oscar did jail time for that, unfortunately. But since I can be out and I can be queer now, I can write queer characters who were always in those historical settings, but were not given any agency in those historical settings, or really written about in historical settings, unless, I mean, some of Shakespeare's characters are inarguably queer. I would cite Antonio from Twelfth Night, the pirate captain who's just running after the twin brother. I think his name is Sebastian, maybe. Or is his name Antonio? I don't know. Anyway, the pirate captain who's running after Viola's twin brother for the entire play. Like, I love you. Like, come on. Like, we don't need to cross our eyes to like get it. But the erasure of that culture, I can unerase in retrospect, by writing queer characters specifically into, and people of color as well, because you're not going to have a lot of heroes. He's a secondary character, but Julius Carpenter, Timothy's friend from the Gods of Gotham, Julius is a black guy who was the oyster shucker. They were famously African American, the super fast oyster shuckers at restaurants at the time. And he can be a really powerful character in that and in subsequent Tim books, but he wouldn't have been a hero in books that were written at that time. So I can talk about all kinds of things that would have been slid under the carpet, and I can lift up the carpet, and I can just sort of like squirrel around in there.
I think Valentine was a very good character for that representation.
Oh
Even
yeah, he's pansexual too.
right. It's just,
Right.
I don't know. I feel like my not necessarily my concept of that time period. I feel like I kind of wish everything was like Rome. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean by that? Like, or like how the Greeks were with love everyone.
Yeah, the Greeks were a bit odd about it. The Romans would put it into anything. So I mean, that's fun too. The Greeks, in Greek culture, it was interesting depending on where you were. So like on Lesbos, sure, like there's a lot of snatch happening on Lesbos. But with the male Greek culture, it was almost always it was homosexual, but it was a mentor-student sort of relationship. Like, it was almost always an older man specifically with a younger man. And then if you were having an affair with somebody who was your own age, once you were, like, let's say, God forbid, you're like 30, and you're sleeping with someone who's 28, that was considered weird. but yeah, there's a lot of people writing historical fiction now who go back to those cultures, like the Achilles biography by, and now I'm gonna forget her name, even though she's absolutely brilliant. But yes, Achilles, um, pretty gay. I mean, you've got a lot of evidence of this. It's not like you even need evidence. It's just obvious. Look at Alexander the Great and his good buddy Hephaestion. I mean, come on, Hephaestion, right? He falls ill, he dies. Alexander the Great decides, well, clearly I'm going to have to execute the physician who didn't save Hephaestion, my good buddy, and we're going to need to have him made a god. In retrospect, they were tight bros. So I don't have to prove anything on this front. And yeah, it would be great if culture were that open about it. However, we still have these really stupid hangups, and like, just to fully, like, date this particular podcast recording, you got Mike Johnson running around saying that like homosexuality is the same as, like shacking up with a cow. And I'm like, no, I've done it and it's not. But I'm not attracted to my cat in that way. I'm attracted to my cat in other ways, like, you know like that. But people are still idiots, I think, is the moral of the story. And when you write historical fiction, you can be really annoyed about people still being idiots, and you can talk about them being idiots before.
I feel like it's really not easy, but like kind of easy in books to like bring up a topic like that that's so controversial, and the reader just kind of like goes over it.
Yeah,
I feel like that's like it's a very much so that that happens all the time. But if they're seeing that in their real life in that moment, they're like, you're gonna go to hell.
right.
Like
Yeah, they can sort of gloss over it if, you said it in Verona.
right, right. All right. So I have a question about characters, not any specific characters, but just who your favorite is and who your least favorite is and why.
In the Gods of Gotham,
Yes.
specifically? Well, Valentine's my favorite character, but I don't know if that's fair to say, because Valentine is practically autobiographical. So like, that sounds like massive self-aggrandizement, and it is not. I write a lot of my own inner shit out in my character. All of my characters are to some extent me. For instance, Tim Wilde, his superpower is that people walk up to him and they'll tell him anything. People will tell me anything. I like at the grocery store, for instance, it was decades ago. I was there with my friend Ian. We were grabbing a six-pack to go to a cast party. I used to be a professional actor for a while, in my 20s and 30s. And I walked up with a six-pack and my friend Ian to the grocery store clerk, and I said, the classic California greeting is, "Hey, how's it going?" You always tack on the "how's it going." She said, "Well, actually, I'm really, really worried about my son. I mean, he's getting in with the wrong crowd, and I'm just so upset about it." And I'm listening, and she's like continuing to talk and talk, and she was just like, I think drugs might be involved at this point. And I said, "Oh, that must be so stressful for you." But seriously, this went on for like 10 minutes. And then finally she said, "Gosh, I'm really just gonna try to stay strong for him and for the family, blah blah blah." So I get my change, and Ian and I are leaving. And as we're going out the door, he turned to me and he said, "I cannot believe how often that happens to you." And I said, "Did I get the wrong change again?" And I was not joking. I thought that I got the wrong change again, because I never count my change, right? And I put it in my pocket. And he said, "No, she just talked to you like you were her therapist for like half an hour." And he was exaggerating. It was probably like 8-10 minutes, but that happens to me all the time. So like, that aspect of Tim is me. Valentine is literally me. I have a addictive disorder. For me, it's just alcohol. For Valentine, it is morphine and alcohol and pussy. And like, sorry,
Get his hands on.
it, my apologies. And he's a sex addict. He's a drug addict. He is a alcoholic. I'm an alcoholic. Um, he is also brilliant, so he's very high functioning. Um, he, he is he has a short leash once he gets going, or if somebody he loves is threatened. Otherwise, he tries to be very charming, and he likes when he has a community of people who respect him and find him to be good company. And so yeah, I was at a celebratory dinner when The Gods of Gotham came out, actually, and somebody at the reading for the launch party had asked if I was actually Mercy Underhill, Timothy's love interest in The Gods of Gotham. And Mercy Under aspects of Mercy are me too, but smaller aspects. And the question was asked, in this sort of like nudge nudge, like, are you self-inserting? Are you Mercy Underhill? And I was like, yes, I'm self-inserting. I'm Val Wild.
All
No.
authors self-insert at some point. I mean, I feel like that's you kind of
Sorry, I didn't quite hear you.
don't all authors kind of
You
self
have to you have to self-insert, and you don't have to write a Mary Sue to self-insert. Here's the thing, it's always going to be your brain fingerprint. It's going to be your brain stamped on the page. You can't get out of your own brain. It's not possible. So any author who says that there's no aspect of themselves in their writing, that the character is it sprang from the head of Zeus, right? It didn't. Like, your brain print is on that page, right? So every character is just, and to some extent, aspects of me. But my publicist, she looked at me. We were having a little chat over, like toasts, and I said I couldn't believe it. It's funny, the question about Mercy Underhill and the people who are very gendered people. They have a tendency to like look. They think it's odd that like I write men most people say effectively. I am not a very gendered person. Clearly, I'm not attracted to a particular gender. I don't have a specific type. I am not a specific type myself. Sometimes I wear collared shirts buttoned all the way up like Johnny Lee Miller in CBS Elementary, and sometimes I wear the frilliest, poofiest dresses you've ever seen. I'm not a particularly gendered person either. So but some people who have a tendency to look in my books for, where's the girl? Like, she must be the girl, right? And my publicist came up to me. She said, "You're not Mercy Underhill." And I was like, "I know, but like, what do you mean?" She said, "You're Val Wild." And I said, "Oh yeah, yeah, yeah." But that was one of my publicists who was like, "Yeah, yeah, you're Val." And I was like, "Yes, I try to keep it under control, but sometimes I don't. Sometimes I fail at that." So, you know, um, characters are interesting because people contain whole universes, right? Everybody does, unless you're Mike Johnson. And you take aspects of yourself that you want to highlight and that work for the character, right? And the different parts of yourself end up creeping into your books. Different parts of your friends, different parts of your family, different parts of your whole circle of acquaintance, but all of that is the composite of your own personal experiences, right? So so you're not going to get away. Wherever you go, there you are. So my characters are I like to think that I have a wide range of characters, but they are all aspects of either myself or other people that I have experienced personally, because otherwise how would you be able to write it down?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I guess Zoom says that I have 7 minutes left. So
Okay.
for some reason you have to upgrade if you add crazy stuff. So
Zoom.
right. I guess this could possibly be the last question. I have two more, but like I'm not sure if we'll get to the other one.
You could always set up another meeting and then shoot me that one.
Right. I mean, they both kind of like go into each other. Uh, the one
I'll
is
talk. Why don't you give me both questions and I'll try to answer both of them.
okay. Yeah, I was going to. Yeah. Where do you stretch the historical truth? Like, if a historian were to read your book, they would find holes. And how do you think it furthers the understanding of American history?
I think that it always furthers the understanding of American history, to answer the second question first, whenever something is personalized instead of detached facts. So you might know for a fact that there was such a thing as Tammany Hall, but you might not know a lot of detail about it. It might not be something that's important to you because it's important to a character. Whenever somebody becomes emotionally invested in a character, then becoming emotionally invested in history becomes much easier, right? Because we are always much more fascinated by things that are in our immediate circle, right? I'm invested in you, you're invested in this, suddenly I care about Tammany Hall, right? I've heard of it, didn't care about it, now I care about it because this interesting person, imaginary but interesting, cares about it, right? As to historians finding holes, people have found holes in the Gods of Gotham. One of my favorite holes, but they're all trivia, to be honest with you, so far. My favorite hole is that I mentioned broccoli at one point in the Gods of Gotham, and apparently broccoli wasn't imported until later in the 19th century, and the person was real mad about it. And they were like, well, Lindsay Pay, all highfalutin with her details and whatnot. And there's broccoli right on the page leaping out at me. And I was like, yeah, I love 1-star book reviews. They're like, oh, chef's kiss. They're so wonderful. This person was mad about broccoli. In the greater scheme of things, no. If you're a historian and you want to find gaping holes in my process, like, oh, but people weren't openly gay back then, they certainly weren't sleeping with the same gender, or oh, but people didn't think Irish Catholics were evil or, satanic or heralded the second coming of Christ. If they want to poke those kind of historical holes, that's either because they have an agenda and they want to, or because they weren't reading the quotations at the very beginning of all the chapter headings. So let's go back to the beginning of the interview to wrap it up. On a macroscopic level, no, no one has found any glaring evidence that I have fabricated things. On a microscopic level, there's broccoli in the Gods of Gotham, and I want to personally apologize for that. And I would like to apologize to the person who read it, who was upset. I'd like to apologize to his family, to his pets, to his neighbors, to anyone who was personally affected by that experience that he had, because I know that it was painful, and I'm the one who put broccoli in the Gods of Gotham, and I take it fully on myself. It was no one's fault but mine.
What a shame, broccoli.
Uh-huh.
Okay, well, thank you so much for answering my questions and taking the time out. Um, it this was really eye-opening, after reading this book, honestly.
Well, thank
Gave
you for reading it, and thank you for having me.
All right, I'm gonna stop the recording.